Look at Federalist number 77. This is the last of the 11 papers in which Hamilton defends the provisions of the Constitution, giving the president, the executive branch, certain authorities and certain responsibilities. And I thought it was just a good time for me to refresh, just remind you of something that I've talked about. But I thought I'll just put this piece of paper here and bring to your attention that the Federalist Papers as a whole make a lot of sense. It's only when one reads 3 or 4 or 5 of them, unfortunately, like they do in American colleges or high schools, they just give a handful, maybe Federalist 10, 51, a couple of other ones, and they say just read these, and this gives the whole thing to you. You can get a good taste of it. But that is not a wholesome taste. Those papers are important, but it really makes sense when you start with Federalist number 1 and go all the way through Federalist 85, in which they discuss why the new states, the new independent states have to unite, what the weaknesses of the first Constitution of the United States was, what that Confederacy lacked, and why they needed to write a new Constitution which would give the federal government energy, stability. These are the words that are used over and over. Energy, stability. So I thought I'd just take a minute and remind you that it is well worth your time to go through all of these. Just keep in mind, just do a simple math. It took the founders a little over 12 months to write the Constitution and to get it ratified in all the states that needed to be ratified. Okay. Now, I have kind of, with my reading of it, because I've been reading them slowly and explaining certain things, I've noticed that it takes an average of anywhere from 40 to 60 minutes, definitely less than an hour per paper. So if you were to divide reading these papers, maybe even one for every 3 days, then within 1 year you can definitely have them all read and kind of reflect on it. And then the second time you read it, it'll become much easier. And I think with some of those lectures that I've included in this playlist, or most importantly, the name of those authors that I've given you, if you read some of those books or even watch some of those lectures, you will definitely have a better feel of the founding of America. That would definitely give you a better feel. Just remember, I know this is not fancy, I'm just doing it the old-fashioned way, but look at this vast land, okay, compared to the original 13 colonies. This is what the future generations of Americans, the ones after the founders, are going to settle. And unfortunately, we know that the Native Americans will get mistreated badly. This is the land that's going to be settled. And this huge land is going to leave a big mark. The states that are going to be created from it leave a big mark on American character, civilization, history. It's very relevant to have that in mind. On this map, this dark orange part are the first 13 colonies. And the minute they have the revolution and they gain access to the lands on this side, all this territory in blue will become part of what's going to be the new independent United States. And there's going to be many states that are going to form out of this area. That's the blue area. This is the Northwest Territory. I've talked about them in the previous Federalists. This is where states of Mississippi and Alabama are going to be formed. And then another important thing that you want to keep in mind is that the state of New York is right here, okay? This is the state of New York. These Federalist Papers are being first published in the state of New York. And it's extremely important for New York and Virginia to ratify this Constitution, because without the two of them, these states would not have united under this Constitution. We would not have had the United States. Because had New York not been part of this union, there's a good chance that these states to the northeast, the New England states, and some of these other states right down here would have formed a confederacy. So it's very important to get the New Yorkers to ratify this Constitution. There were more anti-federalists in New York than federalists. That's why these papers are very important. And like in this paper 77, it keeps on bringing, well, the union that we are going to create has some advantages over our own state constitution, the New York State Constitution. And one of the reasons that New York ratifies, because they were waiting to see what Virginia does. Virginia was the most populous state. If they had not ratified, then all these southern states would probably have made one confederacy and joined with Virginia. So as soon as Virginia ratified, New York ratified. So it's very important to keep in mind that the Federalists, and Publius starts writing the Federalists, and while they're defending the Constitution and explaining it, they're also answering all the anti-federalists that are writing articles in New York papers. So it's very good to keep that in mind. Also, keep in mind back then how people communicated, how fast or how slow the communication was. This little eastern part of New York, which becomes the state of Vermont, okay? This is New Hampshire right here, this triangle right there, okay? And New York was waiting to hear whether New Hampshire is going to be the 9th state to ratify or whether Virginia was going to ratify. So New Hampshire on June 21st ratifies the Constitution. Look how close they are. And it takes 3 days by fast riders to get this message from New Hampshire to New York. So this is the fastest way they could send that message back then. So keep that in mind. And we are talking about a time where travel, there are no roads as we know it, no radio, no telegram, no telegraph, nothing like that. So that's the milieu that they were writing these papers. So take your time when you start reading these papers. It's not the end of the world if it takes you half a year to a year to read them. But just remember that it took a year or so, even longer, for these guys to write and get it ratified. So what you can do is gradually read one paper at a time, maybe listen to my reading of it or other recordings of it. And I'm hoping that with the professors that I've introduced you to, you can actually watch some other lectures and listen to conversations and just build your background. Nobody is going to expect you to learn all of this the first time in 6 months to a year, especially if you're an immigrant or if you're new to this country and you want to become a citizen, or even if you're a high school student, a native person from America that wants to get ahead of your classmates and just wants to study these papers and not wait for your class or high school to teach them to you. So I highly recommend pay attention to that. It will be well worth your while. It would definitely be worth your while. So now let me read paragraph 1 of Federalist 77. It has been mentioned as one of the advantages to be expected from the cooperation of the Senate in the business of appointments that it would contribute to the stability of the administration. The consent of that body would be necessary to displace as well as to appoint. A change of the chief magistrate, therefore, would not occasion so violent or so general a revolution in the officers of the government as might be expected if he were the sole disposer of offices. So here Hamilton defends the fact that nominating ambassadors and some other officers of the executive branch have been left to one single man, that's the president. And then Senate will concur with the advice and consent of the Senate. He says this is the best way we could have done this. And the people who are going to say, no, you should have involved a bigger assembly than the Senate, or you should have got a council of, let's say, 5 or 10 people to appoint these people. He says, when you look at all of these, the best way is the way we have changed it. Because you don't want to staff the State Department, Department of Defense with people that over the years gain experience, and every time the president changes, they've got to leave and somebody else has got to come in. He says that's not stability in the government. Where a man in any station had given satisfactory evidence of his fitness for it, a new president would be restrained from attempting a change in favor of a person more agreeable to him by the apprehension that a discountenance of the Senate might frustrate the attempt and bring some degree of discredit upon himself. Those who can best estimate the value of a steady administration will be most disposed to prize a provision which connects the official existence of public men with the approbation or disapprobation of that body, which, from the greater permanency of its own composition, will in all probability be less subject to inconstancy than any other member of the government. So let the president nominate, and what will happen is that you'll get fit people that will serve the United States, and whenever the president changes, these people with these experiences won't have to be replaced, and you have to start the process all over again. So during the next few videos, we'll talk more about this, but make sure that you keep what I said about part 1 in mind, please, about reading all of the Federalists rather than just a few.